Hey guys, how are y'all doing? Laura here. I'm going to go through a Leaving Cert history essay with you today from the 2015 paper and the United States and the World topic. It's the question about US foreign policy. Now you can see on the screen in front of you there, guys, I'm going to go through different aspects of picking the question and answering the question. You will be able to find the full essay analysed on Studyclix later on, so if you need a bit more detail you can find it there. But I do recommend you have a read of the entire essay before I start to break it down for you. It'll just make it all a bit clearer in your head as I talk about the different paragraphs. So let's get into it. First of all, let's look at the question itself. You have a lot of choice in your Leaving Cert history paper, and I want you to be sure of the choice you make and how to make those choices. So what do I look out for? Some of the things that strike me when I look at that particular question is that I have a choice to make, one or more of the following. Do I have to make that decision absolutely straight away? Not necessarily, but you have to be very careful when writing your intro then. If you find in the middle of your essay that you're going to run out of time and you're not going to get to Cuba, for example, and you've mentioned Cuba in your intro, that's a big no-no. So just be careful there. Maybe leave some space to either add to your intro or leave your intro to the end, I know is what some people would do. But ultimately at this stage, why not go now and practice writing this essay and writing types of this essay so you kind of know how fast you are in doing these kinds of essays. So just be careful with that one. You can see there obviously that there are dates mentioned, so I have to stick to those dates. You might be surprised to hear this, but some people will look at that essay and in the stress of the exam hall will see, for example, Berlin, and they'll talk about Berlin during World War II. So be careful there, just make sure, because you are going to talk about World War II, probably, most of you are anyway. So just be careful that you are looking at this as the American topic. It's after the war, just be careful. The focus of this set task is to refer to these events and why they were important for US foreign policy. I'm not simply supposed to give you everything I know about the Berlin blockade, the Korean War, the Cuban Missile Crisis. I'm to give you that detail and talk about why those details and why those events were important for US foreign policy. If I do that, then I am referring back to the question, and the examiner is going to love that. Speaking of the examiner, before they start looking at your essays, they're given a marking scheme and they're told loads of things, but here's a couple of things to specifically think about that they are told to look for. They are told to check, are the candidates analysing the issues involved? Are they arguing a case? Or are they simply writing down everything that they know? All of the bullet points that they have on, as is the case in this essay, the Berlin blockade, the Korean War, etc., etc. Or are they using those details to analyse, to argue, to give an opinion, to scrutinise, to engage in historical debate? The examiner is looking for that. On top of that, they are looking for relevant, accurate and substantial information. So sometimes students can do one and not the other. They can give loads of information but not bring it back to the set question. Or they can bring it back to the set question, but then they only give sometimes the bare minimum of the information. So let's try and keep those two things in our head when we're writing our essays, reading back over our essays, and indeed reading sample answers. So now let's get into this particular sample answer and see, does this person tick all of those boxes? Your introduction should give some background and set the scene. And this introduction starts off with, after World War II, two superpowers emerged, Russia and America. Okay, that does set the scene for me. I'd like a little bit more detail on that. What is a superpower? Why specifically was it Russia and America? What did they have going for them that made them superpowers? I mean, it informs so much of US foreign policy. It's just important to give a little bit more background to their relationship pre-1945. In saying that, this introduction and indeed this essay does make great use of language and summarising skills. It summarises the entire topic in a couple of sentences. Not an easy thing to do. It's something I would encourage you to practice doing. Because if you can summarise your entire essay in 2 or 3 sentences, that will often form the foundation of your introduction and sometimes the foundation of your conclusion as well. It's an important skill to have. Do work on it. This introduction does give me, the examiner, and you, the student, a clear plan and direction. You know, the introduction should serve as a map, as a roadmap, as a guide. For me, the examiner, this is what they've said they're going to do. So now I'm going to see, do they do it? And indeed, for you, as you're writing the essay, you can refer back to your introduction and say, oh, this is what's next and this is what's next. This introduction talks about how each of those events was a huge test on US foreign policy. That's something that I could easily keep referring back to make sure that I am zooming in on the question, because that is why those things were important. They were huge tests for US foreign policy. So does this high level continue throughout the main body? I'm going to zoom down there firstly, guys, to paragraph 3 and point out a few things to you. After World War II, Germany and Berlin were both divided and split into 4 zones. That to me now is just one little example of where you could have referred back to the question there. So, for example, you could have opened there with one of the first major tests of US foreign policy was after World War II when Germany and Berlin were both divided, blah, blah, blah. So just keep an eye out for those opportunities to constantly pepper your answer with references to the set question. In saying that, this writer does give great substantial and comprehensible explanations of events. They talk there about Germany being divided and the introduction of the new currency and why this started a fight, basically, between America and Russia. And it's a big complicated thing, and it's explained really well in those few sentences. At the end of this paragraph, I would advise again, there is an implication of reference back to the set question. The sentence is, Truman, however, was determined not to lose West Berlin and to keep in with his policy of containment. But I would just advise that in this instance, you could use the words of the set question more explicitly. Truman was determined to keep in with his policy of containment and was not about to allow US foreign policy blow up in his face. You know, you can find your own language and your own way of doing it, but just those words of the question could be made a little bit clearer, a stronger link, basically, back to the set question there. Paragraph 4 opens with the lovely simple linking phrase, Operation Vittles was deemed the only diplomatic yet effective solution to whatever was on the previous paragraph, paragraph 3, which we had just spoken about. So remember, your Leaving Cert history essays should have a kind of a thread running through them. They're not just separate chunks of information. They should knit together as seamlessly as possible. And that's a good simple example of a linking phrase and having a thread running through your paragraphs. So this paragraph is going to talk now about Operation Vittles, and it gives plenty of specific evidence and facts and statistics in relation to that event. Lovely. So they are, as the marking scheme said, they are marshalling relevant and substantial evidence. Lovely. And then it ends with a clear, simple reference back to the question. The success in Berlin and the formation of NATO were both major successes for US foreign policy. Boom. Lovely reference back to the question. This paragraph really does tick all the boxes. Great example. Moving right down a little bit there to paragraphs 8 and 9, you can see straight away that the paragraphs are a variety of length. That's nice. You know, not every single event that you're going to talk about in your history essay is in need of the exact same amount of detail. People make that mistake sometimes that every paragraph has to be, you know, a half a page kind of thing. That's not the case at all. So this person does exhibit good paragraphing and summary skills. They're plucking out pretty much the right amount of information about these events. They know what happened. They are giving extensive knowledge, and their understanding of the events are evident. They are marshalling them and creating sentences, and they're telling the story of the events of the Cuban Missile Crisis in this instance in a clear and concise way. It's not a very bullet pointy essay. You know, sometimes it could be clear that somebody has learnt off loads of stuff about, for example, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and they're just jotting it all down, and maybe they don't really fully understand it, but they know that it's correct, and that can be felt on the page. But the way this is phrased, it's clear that this person does understand the events. But in saying that, have they talked enough about how these events impact American foreign policy? Are they analysing the issues involved? If you look at the very last sentence there, it says, although Cuba had not been saved from communism, it was still a victory. And I just feel that that could be expanded on. Why was it a victory? What was the impact on American foreign policy in relation to this victory? Was it a victory? In what way? And if I did that a little bit more, then I am doing what the marking scheme said. I am analysing the issues involved. I am making a case. I'm arguing. I'm engaging in historical debate. This paragraph does it a bit, but could take it that step further. It could be kicked up a gear. The final part of your essay is obviously going to be your conclusion. So in your conclusion, you want to summarise the events and the arguments that you've made, and you want to place them in the wider context. If you can do that, you're going to finish really strong and leave a good impression on the examiner. This conclusion does summarise the topics mentioned in a good way, and it does use the words of the set question. It's just a little bit thin. A little bit more detail on the wider context would be nice there. You know, after all of these events, what other things tested US foreign policy? How did US foreign policy evolve or devolve, or whatever the case might be? Now, Vietnam is mentioned, so there is some detail on the wider context, but just another sentence or two would be really excellent there. So that brings me to the end of this essay breakdown, guys, which I hope you found really helpful. Remember, the full essay is analysed on Studyclix, which you can have a look at if you'd like a bit more detail on the paragraphs I didn't mention here today. And best of luck to you, and I hope to talk to you all again. Bye bye.